In this episode of the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast, me and my co-host Leif Thulin, we are going to share our thoughts on Duke's exhibition win over Lincoln on Saturday. We finally had the opportunity to watch Duke's highly touted freshman class. So stay tuned to hear our thoughts on Cooper Flagg, Kon Knueppel, Khaman Maluach, and of course, Tyrese Proctor, who's not a freshman, but had a really good game. Big shout out to each and every person that has made the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast your first listen of the day. I'm your host, Rafael Barlowe. Like I mentioned in the open, my co-host for today is Leif Thulin, the guy that watches more college basketball than anyone else. And even though it wasn't the regular season, I know Leif is happy that we actually finally got a chance to watch some basketball this weekend. Again, I know it's exhibition, don't want to overreact, but it's always good when college basketball is on. But before I get too deep into this episode, I want to let you know that it is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. You can place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. And if you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel, please subscribe, like, share, comment, click the bell so you can be notified every time we drop an episode, because we're coming at you 5 days a week at the very minimum. And the Locked On NBA Big Board crew is your source for NBA draft-related content. And also, we're going to talk about some of the rookies throughout the season. Leif, happy Monday to you. You had a chance to watch college basketball this weekend. I know you were pretty excited about that. Outside of this, this Duke game that we're going to talk about, was there anything else that caught your attention this weekend?
Well, I watched last week North Carolina play Memphis, and that was a high major game, and it wasn't necessarily beautiful. And R.J. Davis, the best player for Carolina, didn't play, but I was impressed by a couple of returners and a little concerned by some of the stuff from the freshmen. But like you said, you don't want to overreact. As for Duke, the freshmen were as advertised, and I was thrilled to see just the shooting prowess of Kon Knueppel. Like, you saw him catch the ball and drain threes. You saw him put the ball in the rack, and all anyone cares about is, oh, he had a poster. I don't think the poster mattered. It shows he's athletic, but he might lead Duke in scoring, and that's with Cooper Flagg having scored 22 in that very same game. And then, of course, Rutgers. Hard to miss those highlights, then catch the game and watch Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper combined for 45 and Piscataway. So I'm thrilled about college basketball. I caught all those games, and so I'm looking forward to more and more of these charity exhibitions this year and in years to come.
Yeah, I saw a little bit of the Dayton game yesterday, Dayton versus Xavier. And then I don't know if it was televised anywhere, but I saw that Alabama played Wake Forest, and they won pretty easily in that. And I think UCLA lost in their secret scrimmage against, was it San Diego State, I believe?
Yeah, but they lost by 3.
And then it was last weekend, I heard, and I wanted to go. It was here in the Dallas area. It was actually in Fort Worth. But Grand Canyon and Baylor had a scrimmage, and I was trying to find out if I could get in there. What's that?
It was a tight one. That was without your guy, Ty Grant Foster, playing. So Grand Canyon might be someone to watch out for.
Yeah, definitely. I know they got in. They got a few really good transfers. I know one kid from this area, from the Dallas area, transferred from TCU to Grand Canyon. I heard he had I heard he had like 22 points and 10 assists or something like that. But let's talk about Duke. All right, first I got to start with their starting five. I know we had an episode probably about a month ago where we talked about, does Duke have too much talent? We gave some predictions on their starting five. What were your thoughts on their starting group?
Well, the first thing that stood out to me was Tyrese Proctor wasn't in it.
Yeah.
And that was my whole premise, was there's a couple locks. And I by the end of the episode, I basically said I'd be pretty shocked if Kon Knueppel didn't start. Obviously, had Flagg. I believe by the end of the year, Maluach will be a starter. And then I was like, oh, there's no way in the world Proctor doesn't start. So he didn't start. That's the first thing. The rest of the lineup made sense to me. I think Malik Brown is more ready than Maluach. I think when Duke gets to their best, Maluach will be the starter. I remain pretty confident and stringent in that belief. But they work well together. I hesitate to say I love the fit and the spacing of Sion James alongside Malik Brown. And and Cooper Flagg is going to do his thing. And it didn't really matter in this outing because Kon knocked down 5 threes in the first half. And if he's able to do that and Cooper Flagg is able to use his body and get paint touches, it's paint touches that matter. It's not necessarily how dominant you are physically inside if you're not scoring in the paint. It's if you create shots by touching the paint, whether it's for pick and roll or isolation. Well, they generated enough of that, and their defense was plenty good. I think there'll be evolution to this lineup. It'll change from game to game. And by 10, 15 games in, start ACC play, I think you're going to find a regimented group.
Well, there was I don't know if he's a subscriber, but there was someone that left a comment under the last video we did about Duke, and he had mentioned, and I want to say the episode came out probably a month ago. And I think it was like last week. The person left a comment saying that Caleb Foster had been the starting point guard in recent practices, and that turned out to be true. I'm with you. I was shocked to see Proctor not in the starting lineup. Now, he played well. We'll get to him later on. But I thought if there were a lock, he was a lock along with Cooper Flagg to start. And I didn't think anyone else was a guaranteed lock. So I was totally wrong about that. We knew Flagg was going to start, and Flagg had an impressive game, lived up to all the hype and buzz. He had 22 points, 2 rebounds, 6 assists. Scored in a variety of ways, pull-up jumper, he hit threes, finished in transition, had a nice baseline drive where he did a shot fake and shot fake 2 defenders, 1 dribble, got to the rim, finished with a dunk and 1. I thought he lived up to the expectations. I mean, it was an exhibition game and it was against an overmatched opponent, but it was pretty evident and obvious to see how talented he is and how special he is.
Yeah, and he doesn't force the action. Like, he was the best player in the country in high school, and he played on a loaded team. But every time he was out there, you knew he was the focal point of the defensive scouting report, and he would create the right shot for his team. There was one point, I like that you made this point on Twitter, where he hit the face-up jump shot, and someone said, oh, if Cooper Flagg can do that, it's over. And he said, well, if Ace Bailey shot that same shot, he'd be criticized for a bad shot. Well, Cooper Flagg made it. And I think, and we've had this discourse before. It started with you and I talking about Banchero and Brandon Miller, where it was, they may not shoot the shot that you would deem ideal, but the fact that they have the confidence to make and take those shots, or take and make those shots, is really good. And I feel that way about both Bailey and Flagg. But I feel like Flagg was just flaunting what he can do, and I don't think he necessarily will do that in the middle of the season, because like we saw, he distributes the ball, he gets those paint touches. But if he can do that, it's going to have scouts drooling.
Yeah, I had commented that, and I was halfway joking, and I was saying that, everyone was raving about that shot from Flagg. And I mentioned that if Ace Bailey takes that same shot, he'd get criticized for it. Now, again, I know that there are some concerns about Ace's handle and how much he generates points in the paint. But what's crazy about that, and I'm going on a tangent here, just that comment alone, I said Ace would be criticized for taking that same shot. Someone attacked me and called me a racist just for that comment. And just shows you just like, Twitter is such a crazy and toxic space. I mean, I don't know where you would get racist out of that particular comment. But anyway, I thought Cooper played well. He had his highlight, real plays that you expect from him. But I was impressed with the ball handling duties that he had. It looks like they're really going to give him a lot of opportunities to play as a point forward, and Duke has a lot of flexibility in their lineup.
Yeah, and one more thing about the comment about Foster is you saw them scrimmaging in a couple inter-squad scrimmaging between Duke and like they split up the team, and it wasn't like a lineup that would necessarily make sense. But I noticed Proctor and Foster were split, and my buddy is a very big time Duke fan, very into it. He was like, well, it's probably because Foster is a guy who is the best suited to be the backup point guard in terms of quality of competition. So if they want to have a fair scrimmage and just practice, it's probably that. Well, it turns out he started. So we'll see if that's something to monitor. But the reason I bring that up is, like you said, there's a diversity to which they can attack. Like Cooper Flagg can make any point guard's life so much easier because he can be a ball handler, someone that creates a mismatch every time he has the ball. being 6'10" athletic, can drive to the rim, can hit that pull-up jump shot we talked about, and create paint touches out of thin air. So I don't think necessarily their point guard has such an amazing task like most collegiate point guards do of operating at a shift. I think there's many guys who can trigger the ball on their side, and I'd be curious to see if Kon can do it even, but Cooper Flagg certainly will have ball handling responsibilities. And I think that's part of what Duke does well in terms of developing the prospects is even when they've had really good point guards, they've put the ball in the hands of guys that they think can be stars at the next level. And it doesn't necessarily behoove them more to do it, but it does allow them to demonstrate they have all sorts of capacity. Like Banchero had a lot of ball handling responsibility once they entered half court, and they had a good point guard. And so I think they'll do that with Cooper Flagg.
Yep, I agree. All right, when we return, we're going to talk about Kon Knueppel, a guy whose name has been buzzing over the last few months, and he absolutely lived up to the buzz and everything that is surrounding his name. Scored, 17 points, made 5 threes in the first half. When we return, we're going to talk about his performance. And of course, we got to talk about the poster dunk that caught a lot of people by surprise. But before we get into the second segment, let's talk about BetterHelp, because this episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. And I have a question for you, the listener. What is something that scares you? Halloween lets us have fun with what scares us, but what about those fears that do not involve zombies and ghosts? Therapy is a good tool for facing your fears and finding ways to overcome them, because sometimes the scariest thing is not facing our fears in the first place, it is holding ourselves back, or basically fear is holding us back. If you're thinking about starting therapy, I suggest give BetterHelp a try. It is entirely online. It is designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to fit your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. And you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. So overcome your fears with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedonnba to get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/lockedonnba. All right, second segment, Kon Knueppel. As I mentioned, he had 17 points, also chipped in 5 rebounds, 3 assists. I think he made 5 threes in the first half, finished 5 of 7 from 3 overall. And you mentioned it in the last episode that all the talk coming out of Durham was that he was going to have a special year, that he has been one of the better players. And I've heard that myself. I actually spoke with someone who had been to a couple of scrimmages, and he had mentioned that when they play 5-on-5, or not necessarily 5-on-5, I'm sorry, but like 1-on-1 from 5 spots, that Kon had been giving Cooper some troubles, and he had been able to just score on Flagg, who is, a lot of people believe is the best defender in the country. And so what were your thoughts about Kon's performance against Lincoln?
I feel like I was already high on Kon. Like you mentioned, I believed the where there's smoke, there's a fire stuff early, but he just resolved all doubts that anyone could possibly have at the first half. He hit every open shot you gave him, and he had the highlight athletic play. So everyone's going to gravitate towards that. But what he really does well is he makes the unselfish right play on a basketball court every time. He's a hooper. He knows exactly where to be on the floor, hits the open shot, makes the right play. He's very fundamentally sound, a better athlete. And it's a cliche. Everyone's like, oh, sneaky athlete, and he's a white guy. Like he dunked on the guy, and that's the thing. It's like, oh, is he sneaky? And like they said the same thing about Gordon Hayward. No, he's a good athlete, and he's very well built for an 18-year-old. Like he's sturdy. He's got broad shoulders, and he's not going to be scared of the physicality of the next level of college basketball, nor the NBA. I think he's a top 10 pick just on the fact that the guy shoots unbelievably. He's got an NBA-ready body, and the role he can play is good. I don't think he has the potential necessarily of some other players that we'll talk about throughout this draft cycle, but he's got the plug-and-play ability that's very prominent early on in his career. And I wouldn't be stunned. I won't say I think it's going to happen, but I wouldn't be stunned if he leads Duke in scoring.
That was my next question. I was going to ask you, do you think he leads Duke in scoring? I think it's a possibility. However, I've been impressed with what Flagg has added to his game over the years. At first, I kind of labeled him as like a crazy athletic play finisher, which he is. I think at the very, very minimum, Cooper Flagg has a role in the NBA as a switchy defender and play finisher. Then he started making threes. Then it was like movement threes. And I knew he could pass as like a connective passer, but now I'm even starting to think he could play some point forward. And this wasn't all in his bag or it wasn't always on display a couple years ago. But I think Flagg is going to be able to score in so many simple ways, whether it's just transition, getting steals, the motor. We all know about that, being at the right place at the right time. Now, I wonder late in games, is Kon the guy that they're going to go to, not necessarily to create, but maybe create an open look for him. But I'm torn. I think Kon could be Duke's leading scorer. And of course, I think there's a really good chance Flagg could be their leading scorer. If you had to predict Kon's numbers this year, what would they be?
I'll go 15 or 16 points, 40% from three, maybe 4 or 5 boards.
Which is, I mean, I think that's valid and doable. It's interesting because in years past, Duke has had really, really talented teams, but not enough shooting. Imagine if Kon was on some of those teams that just had no shooting. I mean, the team that comes to mind was the Cam Reddish, RJ Barrett, Zion team, and they just absolutely had no outside shooting. But this team definitely has some floor spacers.
Well, you know what's an interesting thing about this team is, so let's say Kon is the second leading scorer and Cooper's the leading scorer. I'd hazard a guess it'd be like 17 points for Cooper, 15 for Kon. Next leading scorer is probably 11 or 12, whether that's Foster or Proctor. Let's just operate under that assumption. And you guys can go into the comments and say where I'm wrong in that. And I'm happy to read through that and agree to disagree, or maybe I'll agree with you guys. But at the end of the game, you bring up an interesting question. Who is the go-to guy? Because I still think there's this reservation that you allude to. And Cooper was a athletic play finisher, and now he's added stuff. Is he the closer, the guy you give the ball to and he scores? You look at some of the teams that have won championships, and I'll take out UConn the last 2 years. I think they just ran through people. They didn't have to play a close game in March. But you look at some of the other teams that have won, they had a defined role of who is going to close the games. For better or worse, Caleb Love comes to mind. He shoots a bunch of shots, and he's up to the task of, hey, I'm going to get the ball, and I'm going to shoot this shot. I don't know if Duke has a guy, and Les Flagg is that. I don't think Kon's an isolation guy. Can he be a scorer in isolation? I don't think Proctor's that. I don't think Foster's that. I think their best isolation scorer is actually Isaiah Evans. The thing is, I think he's buried on the depth chart because of Kon's ascension. And so it'll be interesting when they play close games, and they will. They're going to be really good. They're going to blow out a lot of teams, but they're going to play some close games. And I'll be paying extremely close attention to the role assignment of Cooper Flagg. And I think this will tell me a lot about how great he can be at the next level if he, at 17 years old, he's able to take over big-time collegiate games in the final stretches.
And I'm not an X and O's guy by any means. But if Duke needed one possession, I think I'm going to put Proctor, Foster, Gillis, Kon, and Flagg after 5, and we're running a Flagg, Proctor, pick and roll. Pick your poison. Either, Flagg as the roll man. He's either going to score in the paint or he's going to make the right pass. And if he has those shooters around him, then it's going to make teams a little hesitant to leave guys, especially in the corners, and the college three-point line is close. Again, I'm not an X and O's guy. I'm not saying that is a closing lineup, but if I needed a bucket, but like 10 seconds left in the game and we had the possession, Duke had the last possession, I think that would be a lineup that I would roll out with a Flagg, Proctor, pick and roll. All right, when we return, I want to talk about Tyrese Proctor. Proctor, again, as we mentioned in the open, was surprisingly not the starter, but he played very well off the bench, scored 19 points. And we're going to talk about his role going forward and if we think that he can, I guess, redeem the draft stock that he had coming into last season. But before we get into that, let's talk about FanDuel. If you are an NFL or NBA fan, you can get a big return on FanDuel, which is America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get the hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more. And it's on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. All you have to do is place your first $5 bet, and that is at FanDuel.com. calm. All right, Tyrese Proctor. Proctor had a good game, scored 19 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists. Again, we mentioned it was surprising that he came off the bench. What were your thoughts about his performance?
He looked motivated to me, and I think that it's easy to attribute for us to say, oh, it's because he's off the bench, he wants to prove he wants to be a starter. But from the basketball sense, as opposed to my assumption of motivation levels, he knocked down open threes and looked confident taking them. And that's big. And last year, you and I had a discussion where I said I think he was the dare shooter, and that's why he led to better success as a shooter. I still didn't believe that much in his jump shot. I'm not sure I believe he's a great shooter, but he looked confident and shot them in stride, right on the catch and shoot, no hesitation, not just because people are leaving him open. And yes, they were physically far more athletic than Liberty, and the teams would have to double inside. He'd get good looks. But I liked that motivation. The lack of hesitancy stood out to me.
You know what stood out to me the most? He got to the foul line 6 times. He was 5 of 6 from the free throw line. I mean, we're talking about a player that has averaged less than 2 foul attempts per game throughout his 2-year career at Duke. If he can be more aggressive at getting to the rim and getting into the paint, I think that takes Duke to another level. And if he can be a better finisher, like the knock on Proctor is that he's just not been a good finisher around the rim or even at the rim in college. And so I don't think he's going to be, he's not going to be an above the rim finisher. But in my opinion, he's going to really, really need to add like this crazy efficient floater to at least be a threat inside the paint. But overall, I thought he played well. Do you think he comes off the bench in their first game?
I don't know. Like, part of me thinks that's a curveball because Proctor, the other thing that we didn't talk about in terms of this is he's an excellent defender. And I know they don't necessarily need excellent defense if they have Malik Brown or Maluach cleaning up the glass, Cooper Flagg's versatility, and you have all these bodies and can outscore teams anyway. But he's a point of attack thorn in your side. He's able to pick up the ball and take away the point guard on the opposite seam. And I think at some point, like say you play North Carolina, I can see Proctor guard RJ Davis. And I know that you could say, well, he could come off the bench and do so. But I just think from the point A to point B, like from start to finish of a game, you want him on the floor enough because he's a good operator of the ship offensively, good defender. And I think he gives you more of a semblance of a pick and roll game. And when Maluach plays, Proctor's going to look better and make Maluach look better. Derek Lively played his best playing alongside Tyrese Proctor as a freshman. I think that Tyrese Proctor is going to elevate Maluach. So I think by the end of the year at least, he will be the starting point guard. And this is no disrespect to Foster. If he's out playing him, fair game to Shire to play him. I just think that Foster is not quite the playmaker that Proctor can be.
Yep, let's talk about Maluach. 4 points, 11 rebounds, 2 blocks. Not a crazy productive game. I think he had probably 10 of his rebounds in the first half. Only 4 points. I think he was 1 of 4 from the floor. Still looks a little raw and behind on the offensive end of the floor. But he had 2 blocks, and he's massive. 7'2", with like a crazy wingspan. And I think just his physical presence alone is going to help Duke out on the defensive end, which, like you mentioned, they already have solid defenders as is, but he gives them another, I guess, defensive weapon. What do you think about his overall performance? And is he a little bit behind what you thought? Again, it's an exhibition game. You don't want to get too worked up, but he only had 4 points and he was 1 of 4 from the floor.
I was a little bit disappointed in the offensive usage. I figured you could get him some lobs, you could get him mismatch post touches because you have all the personnel in the world to create those mismatches. And it didn't feel like he wanted the ball, nor did Duke want to give him the ball and develop and cultivate that raw frame and ability. You saw him against the USA when he played for South Sudan, hit like a mid-range jump shot over Anthony Davis. And I was like, oh my goodness, like if he can do that already, all he's got to do is become a little more confident and then be a lob catcher and someone who can punish mismatches. And I didn't get the sense that they believe he could. And then offensively, I thought the best thing he did was probably the back cut pass. He hit Kon and then Kon dunked it. And that was not a crazy play, but it's something you don't necessarily expect from a 7'2" center that's 18 years old. But I am a little concerned. I think it's more than likely now at this point that you're going to see Malik Brown as the starter to start the year, I still, like I said at the beginning of this, I'm stringent in my belief that Duke's best lineup by the end of the year will feature Khaman Maluach because of the raw physical presence. Think of Mark Williams, think of Derek Lively. When Duke has ascended the last couple of years and had their best stretches of play, they've had a true rim protector. And Malik Brown's an all ACC defender, but it's because of his defensive versatility. Can block a few shots, can get a bunch of steals. Khaman Maluach will take away the rim from another team. And that's what his expectation is going to be at the NBA level. So I think he's got a lot of room to grow. And to answer your question, I am a little bit disappointed in what I saw from Khaman Maluach.
Yeah, real quick. Speaking of Brown, he led the ACC in steals last year, and he had 3 in this game. As far as Khaman, I have him as a top 10 pick right now. And it's not going to be based off of what I think his production will be. It is what he can be or what he will be in 5 years. With that being said, I've seen, like, for example, him look good in the Basketball Africa League. And I know there's some people that really question the level of competition there. But even despite that, the flashes were, impressive. Then I saw him at the Nike Hoop Summit, and I wasn't able to go to any of the practices. I got there late, but I was at the game, and he just looked totally like overmatched against Asa Newell, the physicality, the speed of the game, the fact that, these other players see him high on draft boards, and he's a target. He's a guy that people are going to want to come after. And I think he's going to be a guy that people are going to try to dunk on. People are going to try to, make highlights against him because not necessarily just him, but all the guys on Duke because, they see them on draft boards. But he's the one that I feel like is not the most prepared to handle that level of attention. And in this game, again, 1 of 4 from the floor. I was expecting, if there was a game where I thought he could gain some confidence heading into the season, I thought this was a game where you can go get your 10, your 12 points, because usually smaller schools lack size. And if they don't have size, they definitely don't have it in the second unit, and that's usually like the biggest difference between Power 5 schools, mid-majors, and smaller schools is the size and lack of depth. So I thought this was an opportunity for him to exploit mismatches and go into the season with some momentum. But I will say that I was a little bit disappointed with him on the offensive end, but he still blocked shots. And the pass that he made to Kon, for a guy that's considered really, really raw and has only been playing basketball for about 4 years, I think that is a positive sign for him to have the passing instincts or the awareness to make what seems like a simple pass. And I've watched enough really raw 7-foot prospects to know that most guys aren't able to make that pass if they're extremely raw. All right, let's wrap up with Isaiah Evans. He didn't get in till, I want to say, midway through the second half of the game. And when he came in, he did what we expect Isaiah Evans to do is get buckets. But he had 9 points. And I thought that in the minutes that he played well. I want to say he led Duke in like their intra-squad scrimmage a few weeks back. If I'm not mistaken, he had like 15 points. But it still looks like it's going to be an uphill battle for him to get consistent minutes just based off of what we've seen, what we saw this weekend. What are your thoughts on him?
Like I said, I think Isaiah Evans is the most gifted one-on-one scorer on this team, but I don't think he's physically ready for the competition compared to his teammates, where Kon Knueppel, I talked about, is the importance of his physical stature. He's ready for the physicality of college basketball that's played against 23-year-olds. You look at Cooper Flagg, he's physically an anomaly for his age. You look at Malik Brown, Mason Gillis, they're 23 years old. You look at Khaman Maluach, and we talk about what his issue is he's raw. He's not necessarily ready from the basketball intellect side just because he's learning the game, and he's not necessarily physically ready to use his imposing figure. I think the same goes for Isaiah Evans, and he's going to be hard-pressed to find starting time, especially if Proctor's not even starting. Like, Zion James is a physical specimen. I think a lot of it has to do with physicality for him. And in our previous episode, I said I think he either returns and is a draft pick, or I think more likely he transfers and get to a place where he's the ball in hand star of a team and becomes a guy that raises up draft boards. I think this will be a frustrating season for Isaiah Evans because there's just a lot of people that are more mature and fit what Duke wants to do around their two best players, in my opinion, Cooper Flagg and Kon Knueppel, that it would be very difficult for him to assimilate and make a big impact that we may have expected due to his esteem coming out of high school.
Do you think there's a world where he can just show enough flashes to where if he tests the waters after his freshman year that some team will draft him?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely possible. We've seen it numerous times. Like the best example is Patrick Williams played on the 1 seed and he played as a 6th man. I don't even think he'd have to play as much as Patrick Williams, but he could show a few flashes. We saw Chris Livingston get drafted a few years ago for showing a few flashes on a okay to solid Kentucky team. So I think it's certainly possible. I wouldn't recommend it for his sake. I would go get NIL, transfer to somewhere that will give you more playing time, or stay at Duke in a team that maybe prioritizes your role more thoroughly.
I mean, what about Peyton Watson? Peyton Watson, signed up, or if I'm not mistaken, didn't he go to UCLA thinking that Juzang and Jaquez were leaving? They end up coming back. He has a limited role, but he still ends up being a first-round pick. So Evans, I think there is a chance. I think that Duke is going to have enough blowout games early in the year where he's going to get an opportunity, and I think he's going to put up some impressive numbers in the limited amount of time. But it is, like I said, it's going to be an uphill battle for him to get consistent minutes. Real quick, Darren Harris, what are your thoughts on him, and do you think that he'll be able to carve out a role in the rotation?
I don't know how big his role will be, but the dude can shoot the ball.
Yeah.
I mean, that's been the scouting report on him for a while, and he's bigger than you'd think. Like he kind of appears as if he's not this bigger guard, but he is, and he shoots it really well. I don't know if he carves out a role unless there's injury, just because of what I listed in terms of what's in front of Evans. Proctor, Foster, Kon, Sion James. I don't think he's going to infiltrate that. And maybe you get some time and you show really brightly what you are, but I think you're going to need injury to infiltrate into a top 4 guard on that side.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. Well, that wraps up this episode of the Locked On NBA Big Board Podcast. Once again, thank you for making this your first episode of the day. And I want to announce that Locked On has a newsletter. So whether it's your favorite team, Locked On Mavs, Rockets, Lakers, Knicks, Locked On has a newsletter. It is a one-stop for ultimate team and league coverage and is delivered right into your inbox. You can sign up for free now at lockedondaily.com. That is LOCKEDON daily.com. That's lockedondaily.com, and start your day with the all-new free Locked On newsletter. Once again, it's Rafael, Barlowe, and Leif, and we are out of here.